Well, hello there, listeners. I hope you're well. I feel like I always say that I hope you're well, but it's because I do genuinely hope that if you're listening to this, that you are well, and that if you aren't well, that I maybe produce something that you find helpful. It's a big part of what I'm hoping to put out in the world, and this episode is aligned with that. This episode's going to be a lot about theories around a difficult word, especially now when they're God, are you tired yet of saying, like, "with everything going on," or, like, "COVID adjusted," or "the before times"? I really look forward to the day that I don't I feel like I say the before times at least once a day in a reference with clients, and I so look forward to the time when it's just not even on our radar anymore, right? And the genuine hope that better days will come again feeling is true. But even in the before times, talking about happiness was a complicated thing, because happiness in itself, in like positive psychology worlds, we talk about it like nobody says happiness research. Partly because it just got so misconstrued. People thought that positive psychology was just about like yellow smiley faces and glossing over the hard things in life, which is so not what it's about. But it is one of the major criticisms that, like, oh, is this just positive thinking? It's like, well, no, there's so much more to it than that. Um, and it's vague and it's a problematic word, but it's also in the US Constitution. Like, it's woven into the fabric of how people talk about that thing that we all want. So, not using it then creates its own set of issues independently. So, this episode is going to be about, like, what is that thing, that happiness thing that we all say we want? It's written into the fabric of our society, but at the same time, it's problematic. So, why is it problematic? Well, humans, we're bad at identifying the things that actually make us happy. There's all these fallacies around the belief that when I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. But then it's shown that when you do get the promotion, the bump that you got from getting the promotion is short lived. And then you go back typically to baseline, or you win the lottery. Been behavioral studies of lottery winners where, yeah, there's this euphoria that you won the lottery. Oh my God. And a year later, some of them are even less happy, often because of the detriment that it causes in their relationships, the strain. And then on the flip side, people who suffer catastrophic accidents, who think that their life is over. And then when we look at their long-term time horizon, they're not as unhappy as they predicted they would be, which right now feels even problematic to talk about because there's so many people who are suffering with everything going on that even saying, like, well, but you're not going to be as unhappy as you think you are, like, feels insensitive to imply. I'm just going to own that from the jump. But I think it's helpful and it's important to frame the conversation around happiness with the idea that knowing the aspects of how people work when it comes to happiness means that you can make proactive choices to build more of the good juju in your life, even when things are hard and bad. Because, at least from my lens, it's like, okay, I knew whenever it was that I knew, like, all right, we're going to be in this for a while. It's like, okay, if we're going to be in this for a while and it's going to have times that it's bad, and it has had times that it's been bad and hard and challenging, let me make the most proactive, positive choices that I can so that bad isn't terrible. Bad's just uncomfortable. And neutral becomes tolerable and good becomes good because I'm already doing the stuff that will help nudge it up a few rungs on the ladder. So as I'm moving through this episode, if you are a person that is going through some hard stuff, what I encourage you is to not look at this like, the yellow smiley face lady doesn't know what she's talking about. I hate this show. I hope you don't ever feel that way. Um, but to view it more like, okay, what about this can I use right now to make it more better? Right? Because we want to be better than fine. And what about this can I store in my brain container so that when things are improved, I'm not stuck, like I'm in a better leverage position to apply more of it as things improve. Um, and if that latter bit sounds good, maybe go listen to the episode on upward spirals that I recently put up, because I think that'll probably be helpful for you. So let's get to it. I mentioned in the intro, we're really bad at identifying what makes us happy. Like as a species, at least modern humans, we're not good at it. But the question then becomes, well, why? And I think this stuff's super interesting from a theory perspective, but the idea here is that we're not very good at gauging what makes us happy because we've been wired to short-term reward instead of long-term outcome. And the reason is that from an evolutionary perspective, all the things that gave us short-term pleasure were what either kept our ancestors alive or ensured the success of their offspring so that our species continued to exist. So things like, well, why do carbohydrates and salt taste so good? This is a stupid physiological example, but it really helps illustrate the point. Salt and sweets are very rare in nature, but when we have them, we physiologically do way better. Same for fats. I've been watching a lot of Alone, we kind of binge watching the show Alone, where they take survivalists and just drop them out in the woods, and whoever survives the longest wins a bunch of money. And the last 2 seasons were in the Arctic. And people were eating food but starving to death because they didn't have enough nutritional fat because it's so rare in the Arctic. So there are some things that we cannot physiologically survive without. And if we're put in a situation that we can't have enough of them, we don't do well. But as we see in the modern diet, when you have unlimited access to those things, the short-term reward becomes a long-term problem because your brain is telling you, ooh, sweet, salty, fatty, sweet, salty, fatty. But when you have too much of all of those, you get sick. So then the long-term outcome has a problem. And this becomes true of gambling, sex addiction, the overstimulation of our phones, too much screen time. Like those are all things that overstimulate the short-term reward center and that we think are going to make us feel happy. And what they're actually doing is just like overstimulating our pleasure centers. And that stimulation of our pleasure centers, you may have heard of like hedonism. That comes from the word hedonic, which is this form of hedonic pleasure. These are Aristotelian models of pleasure. This is what Aristotle theorized. That's where we get all these labels from. Thank you, sir. So this hedonic pleasure is this continuous stimulation. And I'm not anti hedonic pleasure. Like sometimes you just got to go out and like drink a fruity drink and dance and flirt with somebody, like, or maybe not. I don't know what your values are, but I'm saying like I think that it's good for us to have pleasure sometimes. But the balancing of that hedonic pleasure is what Aristotle called eudaimonia, eudaimonic pleasure. This is aligned long-term good juju. This is the good stuff. So that would be like purpose, meaning, living your values, living an aligned life. That's eudaimonia, eudaimonic pleasure. And really the well-being research, the happiness research, I think like the concept of the pursuit of happiness is pointing to eudaimonia, eudaimonic pleasure. I am a big fan of all things in balance. I think that those who live purely in the eudaimonic pursuit are missing out on some of the fun stuff. Um, but this episode is mostly going to be about building the eudaimonic bit, the long-term good juju, because I think that for many of us, we have easy access to the short-term bit. And many of us socially, culturally, personally in our households are struggling with the balance bit. But why is it hard? I think the other reason that it's challenging to even talk about this stuff is there is a fair shake of social programming. And maybe there's a little bit of an easy button in there to just blame it on society. But what we're taught to think will make us feel good is also a huge part of the challenge. And it's this if we go back to the lottery example, when I get blank, I'll be happy. When I get promoted, I'll be happy. When I get the right partner, I'll be happy. When I get that new car, I'll be happy. But there's a lot of shoulding in there about, well, we should want a new job and we should want more money and we should want a new car and we should want a sexier partner or a whatever your partner, depending on your needs and values. And I have often felt, and I'm so glad to see this percolating up in the cultural conscious, that shoulding is super dangerous to us socially and emotionally. Because it's while it is natural in our human psyche to compare ourselves to others, what that can lead to, it's this expectation that we're going to step up and beat off and beat someone out. Um, and when you don't, for whatever reason, the self-abuse factor is the opposite of what we're trying to build. So what I try to guide people to, and what I'm hoping is one thing you get out of this episode, is that if you look deeply enough in yourself, there is a version of life that suits you, right? Like where you live and who you live with and how you structure your day and the things you get to do and um, your senses of meaning and purpose, values that all align with who you are. If we take all the, I think of the meme where it's like, be who you are before, someone ruined your shine or whatever. Like if we could get to that core version of you and give them that person, that lifestyle, like there's a version that feels good for you and is aligned with who you are. But that is also stripped off of the shoulding and the obligation and the social programming. I think that's part of the equation of why it's hard. So let's pivot here into, well, what do we know builds up happiness for humans? So that we can start stripping away the programming and looking at, well, what do you want? What do you need? What will make you feel good? And it generally falls into some well-defined categories in the well-being research in the positive psychology world. And so if you're a positive psychology person, much of this is going to sound familiar. Hopefully I can give you a slightly different lens on it. So what do we know makes us happy? Well, positive emotion is an easy one. There's a recent Better Than Fine episode on positive emotion if you want to go check it out. But it is an easy one. And there's two ways to approach it. I think I say this in that episode, so I'll make it brief. You can either focus on building more positive experiences or lessening your negative ones. But the idea is to shift the ratio of negative and positive. So you can pursue things that build positive emotion. And typically positive emotion, when people say, I just want to be happy, they mean positive emotion, but it's so limited in the scope of what happiness is in the eudaimonic sense, right? Hedonism is just the feel good. That's just the positive emotion stuff. So you can either focus on building more of the good juju or limiting the exposure to the bad juju, which we can't always do, right? So if you can't take out the negative, which is primarily what a lot of people focus on, you can still build more positive. And also going to throw out there, the absence of the bad emotion is not the same as the presence of the positive. So it takes both, I think. But that's in a whole episode that you can just go listen to yourself if you want more information on that one. So I'm not going to bore the regular listener with repetition. Because the next one on our hit list is how we spend our time and attention. It's how we're using our minds in the world. In Martin Seligman's model, which again, if you're positive psych, you recognize it's engagement. Now, Csikszentmihalyi has a great book, a great theory of flow. This is the idea that when we get into flow states of cognition, that we have a time slips away, we get absorbed in the activity and then when we come out the other side, it feels really good. It feeds accomplishment. It can feed a lot of things, but that's being so engaged in what you're doing that the world melts away. It's flow. And people who regularly experience flow tend to say that they have greater well-being, right? They have a more experience of happiness. And it can come up in a variety of ways. I always love talking to people about what is it in their lives that they've experienced flow in. Sometimes it's sports or music, writing. Oftentimes I find that it's in acts of creation. I used to work on a software development team, and I know my programmers on that team would slip into flow states and describe it to me before I knew Csikszentmihalyi's theories. And I thought it was so fascinating in hindsight that like here are these computer programmers making code in flow state, and that's when they're happy. I will often have one while I'm interviewing guests on the show. It's part of why I like doing the show so much, is that it's a flow state of conversation. And I think back to when I was an athlete, when I was a performer. If you didn't know, I used to be an actor. I used to do musicals actually, and I'd get so in the flow of the show, I'd forget having done it, or I'd get so in the flow of the game that I'd forget it even happened, because reality would just slip away in the raw experience of consciousness. Which is interesting because now the more I study meditation, it seems to me like one of the things that you're trying to do, being in the present moment, is like be in a flow state of existence. I don't know a ton of theory about how those two dovetail, but it is fun to think about. The other thing that I think falls into this category is mindfulness, mindful awareness of how we're spending our time, what we're doing, and where we're allowing our attention to go. So, are you spending your day in a way that's meaningful and productive and feels good for you? Do you find that when you're spending a bit too much time on on consuming media, are you able to disengage and then re-engage in something else? And what does that look like? And I describe this to myself as like aligning your action. Are you mindful of what you're doing, and then are you aligning your action, your behavior, to where you want to be going, to your engagement, to what's meaningful? So that's how we're spending our time, how we're spending our attentive awareness. Next broad category of what builds meaningful happiness, eudaimonia, is relationships. Who do we spend our time with? It's the quality of those relationships and the people in them. It's a big category. There's a lot of research in it, and there's a lot that goes into building those relationships and what they look like for you versus and different theories, different people, different groups. But it's important to own that who you spend your time with and how you spend that time has an impact on your happiness. And the rule of thumb that I would put out to the universe is the people that you're spending time with, does it feel good to be around them? And it's a hard one in the pandemic, right? Because, like, if you're locked in with people, everybody has bad days, and now it's a small space, and we don't have a lot of control of where we go and how we spend our time. Or you're alone, and that's difficult for different reasons. So I'm not saying that this is an easy one to deal with right now, but it is an important one to call out as part of the construct of what makes happiness, and knowing it allows you to then make proactive decisions. Um, Another big one. This is a big category in my mind, I think about this a fair amount. It's the stories that we tell ourselves, because I think it's generally consensus when you dip around in these circles that none of us are living in a raw stream of reality. Right? We all have this lens that shapes the way we perceive the world and ourselves. And it's a filter, because there's too much information to try to process all at once. And that lens that is your mind uh, is shaped by the experiences that have come before in your life so that you can make good decisions going forward. And that memory, that filter, was also part of how our ancestors survived. To take another food example, if I am in a new area and I try a food to see if it makes me sick, if it's poisonous, and I get really sick, well, now I know, don't eat plants that look and smell and taste like that plant. But if I didn't have the lens of prospection, right, of experience telling me what to do moving forward, I might keep eating the plant. And some of that's instinctual. Maybe this is a bad example. What if it's more about people? If we're going back to our tribal ancestors and I encounter a group of people that are aggressive or manipulative, and I learn through interacting with them that, like, oh, that group of people is not exactly trustworthy, but this other group of people is. Well, now when I encounter someone who's acting manipulative again, I can make positive perspection of, like, okay, that's someone to avoid. Versus when I encounter someone who is friendly, supportive, a good trading partner, we have a good relationship. Now I know, okay, I can trust them and the people like them going forward. And yeah, it's a tribalistic example. Maybe it's problematic too, but it's also evolutionary theory. So if we know, now it's coming back to modern human, if we know that we have this lens that colors our storytelling about reality, and some of that has been taught, some of that has been programmed by the people that raised us and by our cultures of origin. Obviously, some of that information is going to be problematic. I think the last year has given us a plethora of examples of the way that we can be programmed poorly by the culture that raised us to see the world through a skewed lens. And if we know that's the case, then we can choose to examine ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, the meaning that we give things, and build our reality. And maybe you don't believe me, maybe this sounds too heady, but if you are curious about this, go read The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. He's got some great metaphors in there to help. There is a podcast episode in the archives about that about that book, if you want a quick listen for the lessons. But that'll give you some tools to tease apart your own stories, your own reality, and start building something that's more aligned with who you want to be. And we tell ourselves stories about what things mean all the time, about what's happening right now, about the architecture of our lives and our story and what it means. What does it mean that I'm from a little tiny town in the upstate New York? And what is the accomplishment of getting a degree in positive psychology? What does that mean? And I think that when we truly embrace this idea of meaning and the stories that we're writing, we're also then able to prospect on what's that other person's meaning story maybe, and what misassumptions am I making about their meaning story. So, if my partner comes in and he says something and I take it the wrong way, I've told myself a meaning story about what he means. But if I pause and I'm like, well, did you mean to communicate this? And he's like, oh God, no, 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 no. I meant that this happened yesterday. It happened yesterday. We're talking about my grandmother. And I was like, did you mean to say this? Not at all what he meant, right? I misinterpreted his narrative, his relationship. And in pausing in that moment, we were able to unpack that he hit the wrong button in my psyche, because I know I have a lens, especially when it comes to my grandmother. I love my grandmother. So you can then learn to unpack these meaning stories for yourself and build new meaning of the things that you want to feel, that you want to believe. I'm getting pretty meta in this episode. There you go. And maybe you're asking yourself because like, okay, I understand about half of what you just said, but I think I understand that I want to believe you. How do I do this? I think the first step is mindfulness. It is being aware of yourself in the world, in what you're doing, um, in how you're thinking and how you're feeling. It's awareness of yourself in the moment, in the story, in the story of your life. It's looking at ourselves. And then I think the second important element, and I'll own this is just my thinking. I'm sure that there are others out there that might disagree in the order of operations. I think the second one is something that I call self-possession. This is okay, I know myself. I can control myself in the moment. That would be called self-regulation. I can decide how I'm going to respond to things. Um, I know where my boundaries are. I want to reinforce them. I know when I'm being a bit of a dick and I want to change the story. Self-possession. And I can't ever think of self-possession without thinking of um, the song Dear Through a Doja in Hamilton when Burr like belts, I am the one thing in life I can control. That has been a mantra for me for the last year as, the world is falling apart and reassembling and tipping over again and da 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 da. It matters, but in the moment it doesn't matter because I am the one thing that I get to control. And what meaning am I putting into this situation versus what would be the useful, helpful lesson? What would be the useful, helpful story to be telling myself? And how can I make that story work so that I can continue to function and have self-possession? Because I'm the one thing that I can control. I think that's a key to a lot of things, but I also think that's the key to the meaning stories of, all right, I can't control what else is going on in the world. I can't control what happened 30 years ago. I can't control what's happening on the other side of the planet. But I can control the decisions that I'm going to make today and the meaning that I give whatever else is happening and the level of control I give it. To me, that's a really important part of happiness because it also means if I can take self-possession, I can affect change in myself, in my family, as an example to my community, as a leader, I can empower others. None of that happens without this concept of self-possession, which for me directly feeds into self-esteem and accomplishment. That's the next big category of what builds happiness. If I have self-possession, then I get to have control over my choices. Even when those choices are small, like there are certain choices that I don't get to make in the moment, but I can choose the story I tell myself, even when I don't, soft quotes, have a choice. That having a choice is called autonomy. Humans like to have choice in their life. They like to believe that we are in control. Partly, I think it's a security thing. It's a stability thing. There are plenty of studies in self-determination theory about autonomy. I believe I mentioned it in the recent episode. I think on Upward Spirals. But, and I go back and forth in my thinking about this. It's like if accomplishment and esteem are part of the well-being, equation, then we've got to have some autonomy in there. Like, do you have to have autonomy to have a sense of accomplishment? Because if I don't have autonomy, if I'm not choosing to do the thing that builds the thing that feels like accomplishment, if I'm being forced to do it, was it really an accomplishment or was I forced to do it? I don't know. I don't have the answer on that one. But we do know that when people feel like they have a choice, autonomy, they have a greater sense of well-being. And so then if you have goals that align with who you are, you feel like you're building momentum, that builds the sense of accomplishment, which in turn builds self-esteem. And part of that equation is then also having the resources, the infrastructure, the freedoms to work toward those goals with the belief and the drive and alignment to know that you are making your way toward them. So even if you don't have all of the stuff that you want, and I don't necessarily mean stuff like physical possessions, but I mean like the relationships, the stability, even if you don't have them yet, the working toward them in itself can be enjoyable when you feel that you have autonomy, you have momentum, it fits into your identity, it fits into the feeling that, yes, I can do this because I have the resources I need to get there. That's competence. And all of that together builds the momentum of accomplishment. We're almost there. We're almost through the great list of what builds happiness. And there are so many books about this and courses. We talk about them all on the show often, but in case you are a person who's not going to go off and read the books or take the courses, that's why I'm doing this episode for you. This is your quick primer so that you don't have to do those things, but you can still keep up on the show. Next one. It's the care for ourselves and those we love. This is typically labeled vitality, but I lumped in the those we love too, because I think that it's hard to feel good when the people that we love don't also feel good. Maybe some other people would put that in the relationships category, but I think there's bleed over there that we don't own as an industry. And so this is physical well-being, right? Do you have good food that's healthful? Do you have safe shelter? Do you have access to clean water? Do you get good sleep? How's your mental health? That you can obtain sustainable levels of well-being when those physiological needs are met. And you can build longer term well-being when you are engaging in practices that help to cultivate a feeling of physical wellness. I'm going to add to that safety, not just safety for you, but safety for those you love. And I don't just mean physical safety, I also mean social safety, psychological safety, financial safety and security, access to healthcare. I think that those are the platforms that building long-term sustainable well-being for a society, like those are the pillars that's built on. I mean, just ask the citizens of Flint, Michigan, if they feel well when they can't drink the water. And that's a prime example of, I'm sure that I have no doubts that our entire communities there that have moments of happiness and joy because they choose to cultivate them. But when we look at robust well-being, access to clean water feels to me like a no-brainer. And that's really what this is about. Access to the baseline physiological resources to sustain a healthy human body, and then also the long-term cultivation of practices that maintain a healthy human body for you and those you love. And I believe that all of these elements build toward actualization. Actualization is something I talk about in my self-care workshops. And when I ask people what their actualization needs are, oftentimes it's the first time that anyone's hearing about it. Except maybe since like their intro to psych class in undergrad. So no one ever is able to give me an answer about their actualization needs. But my hope is when that happens that people carry it off into the world and really think about it. But actualization is a life where you get to show up fully, daily, completely yourself. And you're contributing to those you love, those you care about, the world somehow beyond yourself. You are making a contribution. And you are connecting in meaningful ways with those people that you love, and they're able to support you in turn as you support them. And that's happening on an ongoing, emergent, moment to moment time horizon. That's actualizing. That's having a life that works for you and who you are in that aligned core being. And it's awesome. And it's not perfect, right? Because problems still come up. You still have a bad day. Sometimes you don't sleep. Sometimes, the baby's sick. That all still happens. But underneath that is this current of like, yeah, I got this. I got this, and I'm going to help other people get this. And it feels good. Just throwing it out there. I don't know, that's a lot. It is a lot. Um, but even when you're having bad days, even when there is hard stuff, it's part of this whole that fulfills you. And I believe that that's happiness. Now, building it, that's another episode. Maybe that's all the episodes. Perhaps that is all of the show is building it. But I also believe that the process of building it in itself can bring its own rewards. That some of those accomplishments and meaning stories are the rewards of the process of building it. And I know in my woo-woo circles in my life, there's talk of being on the path. Are you on the path? Are you on the journey? To me, that path is the emergent path of building either towards or maintaining being in actualization. I don't think that is the end of the path. I think that is part of the emergent journey. But if you ever encounter coaches or podcasters or books or whatever talking about being on the path, I think that this is what they're talking about. And I also think that this is what Aristotle was talking about when he talked about eudaimonia. It's actualizing. And these are all elements that lead us in our journey of self-exploration, of unpacking, of healing, so that we can actualize and guide others to that as well. And really contribute and get humming along as a species. I think that that's possible. I choose to believe it. That's one of my meaning stories. So that's a lot to chew on. God, I hope you have questions. I'm going to introduce you to a new email that you can send those questions to. It's info@darlene.coach. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, feelings, info@darlene.coach. And we're going to leave it there. Thank you, listener. Send in those questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, feelings for some future Q&A episodes that we're going to be pulling together. And have a good one.